and welcome to Wickergirl, the podcast. Brand new and literally just launched. And I'll be your host for this podcast, Simrat/Simi, aka Wickergirl. So, just a little bit about myself. I'm a horror writer, blogger, vlogger, performer, and horror sci-fi film director. I love to immerse myself within the alternative and subcultural genre, often covering a whole diaspora of curious and the strange from all around the world, whether that's films, arts, culture, theatre, dark arts and weird science, you name it. At the moment, I'm preparing to finish my sci-fi body horror film called From Me to You, which I shot partly in Vietnam and will be finishing off here in London. But as I prepare for my exciting shoot, which includes a lot of pre-production, there's a lot of planning, for example, planning alien-esque costumes, there's makeup, there's hair design, there's also your shot lists, of course. I thought it would be a great idea to launch a podcast which focuses on the alternative, the unusual and the obscure. And, there is no better time to do it because devising a sci-fi horror does have its obscure moments. For example, not being able to have iridescent silicone because it costs a bomb. So how can you create a see-through gel squidgy-like material without it degrading or being a food substance either? These are just some of the many conversations that I'm having with my wardrobe and makeup department at the moment. So yes, there's many trials and tests to be done, to and fro discussions like that you're progressing through your artistic form and finding different ways in which to do that. So that aside, I thought it'd be great to embark upon this podcast where I get to venture the weird and the wonderful and share with you lovely listeners. But now welcome to my first podcast, the Richard Jones Ghost Walk. For a long time, I've wanted to do an interview with leading ghost tour operator, author, broadcaster and paranormal expert Richard Jones. And he's also the pioneer for London's most notable Jack the Ripper tour/walk and has many a tale to tell about haunted London. Aside from regular television occurrences, Richard has also appeared on the Living Channel's popular television series Most Haunted Live, amongst other historians, proving that along with all of his other ghostly endeavours, he is the go-to man for all things spooky and unexplained in the paranormal sense. One thing to know is that Richard greets every single one of his guests for his Saturday night ghost tour, and on this mild autumnal night, I watched Richard elegantly dressed in a long coat, sometimes shaking the hands of his guests, marking them off his register. It was truly magical seeing just how many people began to build up around the area, people from all around the world, ages and interests in perhaps the more obscure of curiosities waiting for the tour to begin. And so 55 plus people later, with much extended chatter, Richard summoned us all and the mysterious tour operator opened his show. After the walk, I was able to interview Richard and find out more about his work and his continued successes within this paranormal industry.
Well, tonight we have many ghostly tales. And my questions do not end there, because did anyone here tonight, at any stage, as you came off the underground system, anyone here tonight happen to encounter a fearsome, dreadful smell? Did that happen to anybody here tonight? Did anyone here tonight, at any stage as you came off the underground system, anyone here tonight happen to start feeling incredibly depressed? And that must be somebody who does not normally get depressed when they realize they have to travel on the underground on a Saturday night. Because if any of those things happen to you, there's a good chance you've encountered whatever it is that haunts Bank Underground Station. And that's why I start the ghost walk here. This is the haunted underground station of the historic hub of the City of London. But now, without further ado, it is time for us to embark upon the most frightening, the most terrifying part of our entire evening, trying to cross this road before the lights change. Let us go into the night.
I just want to say I really, really enjoyed the Ghost Walk this evening.
Thank you. Yeah.
And it was fabulous. Can you tell us, look, where are we right now?
Well, we're standing outside the Church of St. Anne and St. Agnes, and believe it or not, we're standing close to the Roman wall. So we've got this wonderful old ruined brick wall behind us, but it's built onto Roman foundations. And this brick wall in this little area here is really, it's some of the last blitz damage left over from the Second World War. So we're in a truly historic setting, and a setting that's seen so much drama and tragedy.
I mean, you are the leading ghost tour operator in London. What is your unique selling point, in the sense that, not without giving it away, but you've survived for so long? How is that?
I've survived, I suppose, just brute determination. I started doing it in 1982, and it's a question of things change, like the storytelling's changed over the years, but I still find that the dramatic approach is always the best approach to go for. So good solid stories, good solid history, and a lot of research, and always keep up to date. That's the thing, because ghost hauntings aren't from the distant past, they still happen today.
You showed a really good recent kind of haunting, in a sense, with the Trump Street.
Yeah, I mean, Trump Street's just one of them. It's like street names. There's so much history, literally written in the streets of London. And by complete coincidence, we have a street called Trump Street, which leads into Russia Row. And by a complete coincidence, the two sat side by side until a few years ago, when people noticed, oh, Trump, Russia Row, right next door to each other. Now, in 1810, Russia joined England in the Napoleonic Wars, and to celebrate, they decided to change this end of Trump Street to Russia Row. And nobody thought anything of it. For the next few hundred years, it was Russia Row and Trump Street side by side. It meant nothing. And then 2 years ago, Donald J. Trump became President of the United States, and the whole Russia row exploded. And suddenly, newspapers the world over began to notice just how prophetic the City of London had been in 1810 by juxtapositioning Trump Street with Russia Row. So much so that, 4 years ago, had you done a Google search for either Trump Street or Russia Row, the first page would have been made up of just businesses in these two streets. Do a search now, almost the first 2 pages are newspaper articles where the journalists noticed how we had Russia Row and Trump Street side by side. The spookiest occurrence that's really ever happened on the tour was the story I covered. Didn't actually happen on the tour, but it was the lady who took home the cobblestone, or the family that took home the cobblestone, and that was genuine, because when she phoned up to ask about all this, she was genuinely distressed. Well, they realised they'd made a huge mistake. But I think I sometimes have it when I'm walking through some of those alleyways, and there's one in particular, I mentioned it, which I haven't been able to do for a few years because it's been boarded over. But I've actually had that happen to me when I've walked through there. I've heard someone say my name, and I've turned around to answer their question, and there's nobody there. So I think that it's little things like that they're not dramatic, and they're not really scary, but they are mystifying, and I think that's the case with a lot of ghost stories. And the group moved on. She lingered behind, and she surreptitiously scooped up the cobblestone, dropped into a backpack, and by the end of the night, the cobblestone was occupying pride of place on a shelf in her daughter's bedroom. Now, the next night, they came home from school and work respectively, and despite the fact the central heating was going full pelt, the house was freezing cold. Try as they might, they could not get the house to warm up. Late that night, as they sat watching TV, the lights began to flicker, and they heard footsteps pacing back and forth across the upstairs landing. They went to investigate. There was no sign of anybody. And this continued for the next few weeks. They got cold spots around the house, heard voices. Another phenomenon was they kept thinking they saw a little girl at the top of the stairs, but on closer inspection, there wasn't anybody there. But the night before she made the phone call, her daughter had gone out, and about 8 o'clock, the mother went upstairs and noticed her daughter had left her bedroom light on. So she went to put the bedroom light out, but she couldn't open the door. And try as she might, the door just would not open. So she called her husband up, and they got shoulders to the door, and together, working in unison, they were able to ease the door open. When they got into the room, they found the reason they could not get in initially was because somebody or something had moved the daughter's bed and chest of drawers from the other side of the room and had pushed them hard up against the door. Now, the room, she said, was double glazed, and double glazing was locked from the inside. So there's no way that could have been done, and then somebody got out of the room. When they got into the room, though, the room had been absolutely trashed. Light fittings have been smashed, posters ripped off the wall, bed covers taken off the bed, clothing taken out of the drawers, all dumped in an untidy pile at the centre of the room. And there, on top of that pile, was the cobblestone from this courtyard. Well, that was it. They decided ever since they had come into the room, they'd had nothing but trouble. That's why she made the phone call. She wanted to come back that night and put the cobblestone back in its rightful place. And I actually did call her a few weeks later. I said, look, I noticed you put the cobblestone back. Has anything happened? She said, no, since we put it back, we've had no further problems in the house. And she said, but it's early days yet. So I waited till March 2006 and I called her again. I said, look, it's been several months now. And she said, no. Ever since we returned it, then we've had no problems whatsoever. Time to time I get joined on the tour by paranormal investigation groups, and they will do the tour prior to going on to do an investigation at a haunted house, pub, or other haunted building around London. And a few years ago, I was joined by one such group. And one of the chaps in the group was doing EVP, electric voice phenomenon. And his method was, he'd let the groups go off, so he had the alleyways to himself. And then he'd start recording, and he'd ask questions through the air. Questions such as, is there anybody there? If there's somebody there, could you give me a sign? Or if there's somebody there, could you make yourself known to me in some way? And then he'd wave his recorder around. And because of what I'd said about this passageway, he let us get right the way through before he set off. And he went out through it with his recorder going. And when he got to the threshold, he noticed the drop in temperature, and he commented on it on his recording. So he stopped and asked, is there somebody there? If there's somebody there, could you make yourself known in some way? And at the time, he heard nothing. But on the Monday, he uploaded his recordings onto his laptop and then listened back through headphones. And when he listened to this recording, he heard something that he had not heard at the time. At the point where he asked, is there somebody there? There on the recording, when he asked his question, after that question was a menacing whisper telling him in no uncertain terms to get out of here now. And he hadn't heard that at the time, but there it was on his recording. I would say the most haunted spot in London has to be the Tower of London. And I would say why, because it's just had so much drama, so much tragedy. It's been a place of execution, it's been a place of imprisonment. Those who've languished within its grey imposing walls, it reads like a who's who of English history. I mean, you can remember Guido Fawkes, well, even Elizabeth I spent time in the Tower of London, Sir Walter Raleigh. I mean, the list just goes on. And to just think that something of all the anguish that they felt, all the hopelessness they felt, somehow it seems to have got itself imprinted on the walls, and you just go to some parts of the Tower of London and you can just feel the despair just in the air around you. And I think because of all that tragedy, everything that's happened there, inevitably it's haunted. So I'd say that's, in my opinion, the most haunted spot, albeit the place that has the reputation for being the most haunted is number 50 Berkeley Square, and that's a place that there's all sorts of stories about how it happened, but there's stories about people jumping out of the windows and impaling themselves on railings, people spending the night in the haunted room and going mad by the morning. I've even, in 2001, I did a programme for BBC on haunted London. And they actually locked us in the haunted room. Me and the sound man had to stand in that room, and basically they went to film from the square below, and they were going to radio through, and then the signal was, when we got the signal, we would just start switching the lights on and off, and we both stood there in the darkness in that room, and we were both terrified. And I honestly, I don't scare easily, but I just could not wait to get out there, and it was almost a race between us to see who could get through that door first. It was so spooky in that room. At the moment it's empty. At the moment it used to be Maggs Brothers, antiquarian booksellers, but they've moved out now, and it was empty for a time. I don't know what's gone in there now, but they used to be quite accommodating about allowing people to go in and have a look and just soak in the atmosphere. But no, it's a lovely building, but it's a scary building, and it's got that reputation for being the most haunted house, or the most haunted house in London.
On your point about you can sometimes feel the auras and the echoes of the past against the walls, or wherever you are. There's a lot of redevelopment going around in London. There's so much. I mean, do you think, I don't know, in 5 to 10 years, when London is almost unrecognisable, are we going to have the same feeling, the same auras? Are they still going to be there? Or are they going to somehow, I don't know, be obliterated somehow?
Uncorked.
Yes.
I think they always will. The point about London is London's a city of regeneration. It's been destroyed by fire, it's been destroyed by bombing. But every time it gets destroyed, it picks itself up, dusts itself down, and rises from the ashes. But every time it does so, it leaves behind little pockets of the past. And those are the places like the alleyways we explored earlier. You go into those, and it's almost like you've walked into a time warp. And you wouldn't be surprised if Charles Dickens came walking around the corner waving to you or something like that. So I think London's always had that, but I think London's always been able to sort of maintain its air of mystery, and I think that will always be there, because you always get little pockets of the past will survive. And of course the other point about the building work is they're digging deeper now, because they're building higher buildings, and because they're doing Crossrail, they're digging deeper into the subsection of London. And of course they're finding a lot more as well, so they're getting Roman remains turning up. They found endless burial grounds and plague pits, so I don't think it'll be a case of it'll obliterate. I think it'll expand on the sinister side of London, the things they're finding.
The last time she honoured us with an appearance was last Saturday night, so if you do have your digital camera on you, if you do have your mobile phone camera on you, why not take a photograph of the Georgian vulture and see if you don't get the ghostly girl looking down from that window pane. And if you don't, please don't leave pictures disheartened. There's always Photoshop when you get home tonight.
Tell us about some of the apparitions that sometimes appear on your tour.
On the tour we get some strange occurrences actually. There is one particular place, the Georgian Vulture, which is this wonderful old hostelry. It dates back to 1600. It was a favourite with Charles Dickens, possibly the place that Scrooge goes to on his way home on Christmas Eve, just prior to his hauntings. And there's a window in the alleyway. It's an alleyway called Bengal Court, and there's a middle bottom window pane where people will take photographs. And the number of times people have looked at their photographs and said, what's that in the window? And they expand the photo, which of course you can do now. And there's a girl wearing a white mob cap looking down from that window pane. And it's happened so many times. People see her. And it really is. It's a really creepy location. But it's also a lovely historic and atmospheric location as well. So that's one of the apparitions. Another one I've actually had is we get a lot of orbs. So people would take photos. There'll be orbs sort of hovering around places. And I'm dubious about orbs. I mean, I don't think they are supernatural. I think the natural explanation is it's particles of dust or pixelation when you take a photograph. I've also had one really strange one in the churchyard that I finish in, where I do there was a tradition that you could raise the spirit from one of the graves. And the Christmas before last, it was pouring with rain when I did the tour, and I finished in that churchyard, and I put my umbrella in the ground, and I was standing there doing the story, and there was a chap standing on the other side of the wall taking photographs, and suddenly he got very excited and came running around and going to his family. And after the tour he came over and said, look at this, and he's actually put it on my Facebook page, this photograph, and I'm doing the incantation. Where the gravestone is, there's this swirling column of mist lifting up in the air alongside me. And it wasn't on any other photograph except just one photograph. The other ones on either side, completely normal. And yet there's this swirling column of mist on there. So I think that has to be one of the most unique ones and most unusual and inexplicable ones. I mean, you could say it was the atmosphere or whatever, but no, I really think it really does look the part as though something's coming out of the ground.
And then come the evening, his day's toils ended, Philip Whitehead would step from the bank, and there was Sister Sarah, waiting to walk him happily home. They were devoted to each other. But Philip Whitehead lived beyond his means, and Philip Whitehead did something very unwise for somebody who works at the Bank of England. He took to forging the banknotes that are issued by the Bank of England. Now, believe you me, if there is one thing that they frown upon their employees doing in there, it is forging the currency of this realm. It's an act of treason. He was found guilty, and in 1812 they hanged him outside Newgate Prison. Poor Sarah. Poor Sarah. Despite the fact it was the talk of London, she apparently never got to hear that Philip had been executed. And despite the fact she was so devoted to her brother, she apparently never noticed that he'd gone missing. And each day she would turn up the bank 3 times a day and ask anyone she met, could you tell Philip Whitehead his sister Sarah is here to see him? And they would just play her along and they'd say, he's not been in today, Sarah. Oh, she'd say, well, tell him I'm outside when he does come in. 2 years went by. 1814, she went in there one day and she met somebody who did not know who she was and did not know her story. And she asked him,
you seen, could you tell Philip Whitehead, his sister Sarah, is here to see him? And he said, look, you don't know. He was executed 2 years ago. Well, the shock turned poor Sarah's mind. She refused to accept the fact her brother was dead. She most certainly would not accept the fact he'd been guilty of anything. She went insane, and in insanity, she convinced herself that the bank directors were withholding a family fortune of £2,500. Hence the attack over there in 1816 on bank director Baron Rothschild. So they sent Philip's best friend to meet her, and he took with him two things: a money order for £50 and a contract. If she would sign a contract not to come back to the Bank of England, she would get £50. You cannot enforce a contract on the dead, and many is the late night wanderer who's been walking through this quarter of the old city when they found themselves confronted by the sudden strange appearance of an old lady in a black crepe dress. She shuffles up as if from nowhere, and in a low, despondent voice she inquires, "Have you seen my brother?" causing many a city employee to scream and run hell for leather for the safety of Bank Underground Station.
Do you believe in ghosts, and why?
I do believe in ghosts. I honestly don't believe that the dead come back and haunt the living. The theory I think is most accurate is that I believe in what's called the stone tape theory, and that is that you can have an experience will happen at a location. It might be happy, you get tragic experiences, but there's a lot of happy experiences, and there's a lot of happy ghosts out there as well. And I think that somehow you can leave something behind that, if you like, gets recorded on the stone or in the brickwork or something, and then there's certain individuals who are tuned into that frequency, and they're the ones who go places, and they sense the ghost. And that's an interesting thing, actually, because people say, "Oh, have you seen a ghost?" And I find from research, when I interview people and they say, "Yeah, I saw a ghost, I'll tell you my story," and then they tell me the story, and they didn't see anything. They felt something, or they heard something, or they smelt something. It's very rare you get a full manifestation. And so in that respect, I think that would explain the stone tape. And we've all experienced this when you go to somewhere and you think, "Oh, this place has got a very sad feeling to it," or "This has got a very happy feeling." And I think it's all linked into that. And I think it might be something in our subconscious that we've lost the ability to really recognise. Because, of course, the way we've survived for so long is because we must know when things that are dangerous to us. It must be there in our subconscious, and perhaps we're just triggering some primeval thing that is leading us to think, yeah. So maybe it's just that there could be something there that warns us that something could happen here, and we pick up on it.
It's like, I guess, how animals have the fight or flight, and that instinct, that feeling,
Exactly.
And
yeah.
when we see there's a crisis, we see the birds flocking.
Yes.
So it's a bit like that, maybe.
Yeah.
We just have to, maybe in some
We
people...
can't tune it, yeah.
Yes.
We've killed off that natural instinct because we're so dependent on outside influences, and we let everything do it for us. So we're not like the animals who can sense that they can just pick up on even just very slight movements. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's our ancestors leaving behind something that will warn us, and we just pick up on it, and it gives us that feeling, and that's how we get to see ghosts.
Well, actually, me and my friend, we went to Pompeii,
Yeah.
and we arrived there, and we suddenly were overcome with this really depressed feeling. We were we seemed like all of a sudden our joy and our happiness and our everything, we felt like the weight of the world was on our shoulders. And then she got very, very sad. And then she started to lose energy and become very lethargic. And then I started to get very angry, and I started to get very emotional. And then we ended up not talking to each other, but yet following each other around, going around. We ended up having blazing arguments. But we had no idea why. Why was it that we were so agitated? Then she suddenly went towards there's lots of little coves inside.
Yeah.
And went to a stone and lay on the stone, and she couldn't move, and she was just there, her hair draped across the stone and just there, and I didn't know what to do. It's like all the energy had been drained from her, and I had to say, "Come on, let's go. Okay, we'll go." So we tried to get out of this place, and we did eventually, and when we came out, we felt this amazing relief. We got to the car park, and we felt like something we'd been through something, but we couldn't explain it. And why were we arguing? And why were we so upset and agitated, and why did she suddenly feel so lethargic and depressed and couldn't move? And it was unexplainable.
It's incredible. I mean, it is. It's there are things, as I say, there's houses you go to, and I think it's interesting. I mean, I think things like that, because you know what's gone on there, and I think you can get that sometimes when you go to a location. If you go to somewhere where someone's been murdered or some execution ground, but then again, I mean, there's locations you can go to where you've got no knowledge that something's happened, and suddenly that exact same feeling, you think, I mean, I had this in a place in Scotland called Reek Castle, which is out in the middle of nowhere. It's in a wood, and you have to walk across farmland to even get to it, and then it's a ruin. And I went into this place, and I'd love to say it was a dark, stormy night, and I was bravely battling the spirits, but it was a bright summer's morning in August. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. I got to this place, and all of a sudden, it was bright, it was hot, and then suddenly it went cold. And I was walking around, and that exact same feeling, I just got absolutely despondent, then terrified, and then I heard footsteps. There's a part of the tower's got like a staircase going up that goes nowhere, but I heard footsteps going up the staircase, and I couldn't get out of there quick enough. And all the way back to the car, I was convinced I was being followed, and I was just looking over my shoulder. And again, it's that thing. It's nothing I can put my finger on. I can't say it was this, it was that, I saw this, something. It's exactly that same sort of thing. And I think, it's just something in us that we might be picking up on something. And we've got these, if you like, something triggers it in us, and our primeval subconscious survival instinct comes into play, and we're being warned. You're obviously not in danger, but you could be in danger. Something happened here, and we're picking up on it. They often say with animals, don't they? When they take animals to slaughter, that the animals don't know where they're going, but they can sense death. I've heard it said they can smell death, and they can actually sense what's going to happen. And maybe that's in us as well, and we've just suppressed it because we are so civilized.
Of kind of paranormal shows, and there's a real fascination with the paranormal and so forth. What's your take on these kind of shows and these reality TV?
I think the paranormal shows are interesting. I mean, I actually did Most Haunted for 3 years, and I think my experience, I was the historian, so my job was to look up the history and find out the history of the place, and then if Derek or any of the other mediums picked up on something, to try and explain it and say, is there a rational explanation, or did this that they picked up, did this happen? I can honestly say that it was an intriguing experience. It was whether it convinced me that of ghostly activity, I don't know, because one of the points about the show was that a lot did happen, and that people wanted a lot to happen, because what a lot of people didn't realise was that there were a lot of people on set. So when you're in a dark cellar, there's probably about 20 people standing around, and it's very easy if something gets knocked or someone opens a window somewhere for things to happen. But I can say that there were things on that I mean, there was one we did in Pendle, when we did the Pendle Hill one, and they were out in Pendle, and John the sound man and several others came back absolutely distressed, and I was actually sitting in the bar with them afterwards. This is when they got back about midnight, about 1 in the morning. And I saw firsthand that they were shaking, that they really had goosebumps. So obviously they've been affected by something there. So, but I think what's interesting about them is that they really have opened up this great interest in the paranormal for people. And I think it's also opened up an interest in history as well. I mean, one of the loveliest things I got from Most Haunted was a mother who actually came on my ghost walk, actually, and she said, I've just got to thank you. I said, "What?" She said, "My little boy," she said, him and his friends watched when you did Dick Turpin, which actually was my very first Most Haunted. They watched that, and they got really engrossed in the history. So they spent the next 2 months, every Saturday they were down the library, and they did a fantastic project on Dick Turpin. And she said, "I've just got to thank you," because it occupied them, and they really learnt that history could be interesting by researching it themselves. And she said, "I just want to thank you for that." And I thought, well, that's great, because no matter what you think about the show, if it inspires people to go and learn more, to do more, then it can't be a bad thing. And so I think from that perspective, I think they're brilliant. I think some of them go a bit over the top, but I think that is going to be inevitable. And I think it does encourage some people to sort of want, because the thing about paranormal is there's a lot of ghost hunting, that a lot of very uneventful things happen. A lot of it's very boring. It's long hours sat in dark cellars or dark rooms, and nothing happens. And then and when something does happen, you're often so bored you miss it. You don't realise till later on that it's happened. And I think from that respect, I think it's encouraged a lot of people to think that things will happen quickly for them. And I think a lot of people are doing it because we're in the age now of you want to be famous for being famous. So I think a lot of people think, I can become a celebrity if I do this. And of course, the whole point about it is that it's fascinating, it's interesting. So I think they've opened up that, and they've made it, if you like, they've made it. I mean, prior to Most Haunted coming out, I remember I used to go around doing ghost books. 1997, 1998, and I used to go, and my method then, because this was before the internet, I used to have to go around, and literally I'd drive around Ireland, and I'd see a likely looking building, and I'd stop off, and I'd go up and say, is this place haunted? And then I'd get told the story. And the thing was then, so many people just didn't want to talk about it. No. And then suddenly, because they thought it would make them look eccentric or slightly unhinged, and then suddenly everyone's doing it, and so suddenly people are more willing to talk about it. And I think that's the good thing these programs have done.
A good antidote, I suppose. It's going back to basics.
It's the best way. I mean, the problem with the internet is, the internet's fantastic. Don't get me wrong, it's fantastic research. But I think in a way it's devalued knowledge, because when I went and did that, I valued the knowledge I got from it. I valued the little snippets, the little anecdotes I got. I valued the history I discovered. Which I don't think you get the same thrill if you just type it into Google, and then you've got a million answers coming up. And of course, the problem with the internet is that anything can go on the internet. So a lot of stuff that gets on there is quote off fake news, and you get fakes, and I just think you get a lot of pseudoscience goes onto the internet. And I think there's nothing better than going to an old pub and there used to be. I always used to say. But there was the old man at the bar, and he was, wherever you went in a community, there was always an old man at the bar who, if you asked something about the locality, then I would say, buy him a pint, he'll tell you, and you buy a pint, and then you get this wonderful folklore from him. And I think the internet's taken over from the old man at the bar now.
We all huddled together in the small churchyard of St. Anne's and St. Agnes, where Richard then explained a tale surrounding a particular tombstone. Richard then finished by performing a ritual done by a way of an incantation to raise the dead.
So depending on which tradition you read, hear, and choose to believe, it's one of two people buried in this grave. Either it is a witch or it is a murder victim. Either way, both traditions agree on one thing. It is possible to raise the spirit of the person buried here. And you do it with an incantation. I call on thee, whoe'er ye be, rise from this grave and follow me. That's once. I tweak the nose of fear. I call on thee, whoe'er ye be, rise from this grave and follow me. That's twice. Well, you get the drift. But if you do it 3 times, tradition maintains the spirit will rise from the grave, follow you home, and haunt you for the remainder of the night until dawn comes and frees the spirit to return to the grave.
Oh, I must say, this has been a real pleasure. I can't wait to do more of your tours.
Oh, thank you.
Tell us what is next for you, or what you're working on.
I'm working on, at the moment I'm working on my free walks, which are downloadable PDFs that people print off, and I've got 21 of those on the internet at the moment, and I'm also incorporating into them quizzes as well. So you go around and you have to do quiz trails, but walks-wise, I'm working on a new Hampstead Vampires Walk, and that's going to be coming out soon into the old churchyards around Hampstead, which of course is where parts of Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, were based around Hampstead. So so I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a nice spooky tour.
Thank you, Richard Jones, for that incredible experience that was theatrical, hypnotic, educational, and wildly suspenseful. For more information on Richard's tours, ghosts, walks and books, you can visit his website at www.london-ghost-tour.com. You've been listening to Wickergirl the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter at Wickergirl666. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing more with you soon.